Hello and welcome to Real Cheating Story. Have you ever slept so long that you knew it was way past time to get up, but you still couldn't force your eyes open? If you have, you know the feeling of sensing your surroundings but not being able to see them with eyes that just won't open. You know you're at home in your bedroom, and the sun is blasting through the window shades because you can see the light through your eyelids. You can hear a bird chirping outside the window in the tree in the backyard, and you hear the familiar sound of the furnace kicking on and eventually cycling back off. Gradually and reluctantly, you come to the realization that no matter what you do, you can't go back to sleep and you may as well get up. The world sort of fades in on you as you open your eyes. I faded into a conscious state in a similar manner, but it wasn't on a pleasant sunny morning. It was a dark, lonely night in an unfamiliar location. After a bit of head shaking and cobweb clearing, I began to recognize where I was. It was the intersection of a county road and a two-lane highway, a little over a mile from my home. I wondered what in the world I was doing out here alone and on foot so late at night. As a car drove by, I looked at the road using its headlights, but my car was nowhere to be seen. I said to myself, "What the hell, Ken? You may as well start walking. Maybe you can make sense of all this on the way home." When I brushed an errant strand of my bangs out of my face, I thought that my arm looked a little transparent. It has to be the dark and your head playing tricks on you. I held my hand up between my face and the street light about 100 yards back towards the intersection that I was walking away from, and I seemed to see the light through my hand. "You can't be see-through, dumbass. You must have hit your head." That could explain a few things. I felt my head with both hands, but it didn't feel sore or bruised, and there was no blood on them when I pulled them away. Pull it together, dude. Focus. What is the last thing you remember? I found that talking out loud to myself always helped me think things through better, as it would slow down my thoughts enough that I could catch any mistakes and correct them. I began going over the last bits and pieces of my life and trying to organize them into a coherent timeline that would explain why I was out here. By the time I was at the corner of the cul-de-sac where I lived, I had pieced together that I was on my way home from work and had stopped by the church to drop something off or pick something up. I was on my way home from the church, which would put me at that intersection, but it should be about 5:30 on a February afternoon, not the middle of the night in late March or early April, as I was guessing because I had been looking at the dark green grass of spring and the flowers in bloom. I figured it to be at least 2 or 3 in the morning by the amount of traffic going down the streets that I walked home on. This just didn't make any sense, but then again, it didn't make any sense that a man in a cowboy hat would be sitting on my front porch in the middle of the night. "Kay Goodman, I presume?" "You're right on time," he told me in a matter-of-fact tone with a slight western drawl. "Who are you, and what are you doing on my porch at this time of night?" He went on in his easygoing manner. "The simplest description is that I'm your spirit guide. My name is Tom, and I'm waiting here for you." I know that's a lot to take in, but trust me, it gets worse, or deeper, depending on how you take it. Please sit with me for a spell. I've got a lot to tell you before you walk in there. I don't know who you think you are, but I'm going inside to my wife right now. I'm sure that she's worried sick about where I've been." Tom cut me off. "But you're not exactly sure where you've been yourself, are you?" "How did you know?" "That's what I'm trying to tell you. I'm here to help you transition to your new existence." "My new what?" I asked incredulously. "Okay, there's no easy way to tell you, so I'll just come right out and say it. It's a shocker. Are you ready? Brace yourself." "You are dead," he said with a stone-cold sober face that gave credence to his words. "You're out of your damn mind. I'm standing right here on my front lawn in the middle of the night talking to a lunatic. I think you need to leave right now." I feared for my family's safety as well as my own. "Okay," he calmly replied, "if that's what you want, I'll leave. However, first I think you need to answer one simple question for me. Does that seem fair to you?" "Fine. What's your question?" "Where are your feet?" I looked down where my feet should have been, but they weren't there. Somewhere about my kneecaps, I thought. "What the?" In layman's terms, you're a ghost, he said, pausing for effect. We prefer to think of ourselves as holy afterlife payback seekers, or HPS for short. Focusing on the word holy, I sheepishly asked, does that mean there is a God, and I'm going to? Hey, I can't answer those questions. You'll get the answers soon enough. Let's just say that if you were totally and unabashedly on the roster to visit old Mr. Fire and Brimstone, you wouldn't be here. But your fate hasn't been completely decided either. I would hate to oversimplify this as your final test, but what you do before you're called to final judgment could make a big difference. However, the main reason that you're here is that you're needed here. I don't know the future, mostly because it can and does change, and I've only been briefed on the recent past as it pertains to why you're here. No doubt you can only remember bits and pieces of your last day, which was almost 4 months ago. Why didn't you come back sooner? I asked. Simple. You weren't needed then. Events needed to happen before you returned. I don't set this stuff up, and I could try and make it sound all zen-like with mysterious cryptic messages, but I like to keep things simple. A few of those events began before you died. One reason you can't recall much about the day you passed is that it is simply too painful. I'm going to run you through it quickly, kind of like ripping off a Band-Aid. After I'm done, the memories will come rushing back, so prepare yourself. This won't be easy for you. You left work that day like any other workday. Remember that your wife of 3 years, Becky, was going to be at a church committee meeting until 5:30. When you got off a bit early and considering the argument you had the night before, you decided to surprise her at the church and take her out to a nice dinner. When you got to the church around 5, there were so few cars that you believed the meeting must have been canceled, but her car was still there, so you went in. After saying hello to the secretary, she informed you that Becky was out in the gym getting it ready for a small dinner that night. As you walked into the gym, you started to call out for her but heard grunting and other muffled sounds that made you hold your tongue. Following those sounds, you found her sitting on the church kitchen counter with her clothing in disarray, and a man from the church, Jim Flanagan, with her. They were engaged in a compromising situation. It was then that you cleared your throat and angrily told her, I came to take you to dinner, but it looks like you've already been taken more than you should have. Don't bother coming home, in a church of all places. You left as suddenly as you'd appeared, hearing her call after you. You walked outside, got into your car, still reeling from the shock, and headed for home when another car, driven by a drunk driver who ran a stop sign, crashed into you. By the way, he didn't fare well either. He went south for a long-term visit, if you know what I mean. He gave me a knowing wink. It all came rushing back to me, the pain from finding them, the pain from the accident as I lay dying, and the indignity I suffered while waiting for the cops and paramedics to arrive. Becky cried, telling me how sorry she was, her blouse still buttoned crooked. I remembered standing back, watching the whole scene. I swear Jim gave me a smirk more than once. A few other people from the church came out, and the cops arrived, pushing the crowd back to administer first aid. I tried to shout, but I don't think I was as loud as I intended when I yelled, "Keep that cheating wife of mine and her lover away from me." They all heard it, though, judging by their expressions and Becky's loud sobs. Now, all that hurt, pain, humiliation, and 1,000 other negative emotions ran wild through me like a tsunami crashing into the shore. I let out what could be described as a howl of pain that could wake the dead. I later wondered if it had awakened any other souls. Help's not so loud, Ken. They might hear you, or maybe that's a good thing. To the living, it sounded like a ghost moan. That's where they got the idea for the whole moan thing. If they heard that, one of them might peek out the window to see what made that noise. They can't hear our normal level of talk or even yelling, well, most of the time. They didn't actually hear the moan as much as they could have felt the hurt you released when you did that. For future reference, if you want to be heard, remember that moment. Relive that moment, feel all the pain from that moment, and then let it all out like you just did. If the living are quiet enough or receptive enough, they will hear you. I remembered being placed into the ambulance after the firemen had to use the jaws of life to pry what was left of my mangled body out of my car. I recalled crying, not from the pain, but from the heartache of betrayal, which hurt much worse. I remembered losing the will to live and letting go in the ambulance. Then there was a great nothing until the fade-in just a little while ago. The movement of the curtains in the front window caught my attention. It was Jim Flanagan. He was living in my house with my wife. Being in shock, I couldn't do anything about it then, but now he was mine. I leapt up from where I'd been kneeling and moaning on my front lawn and shot towards the front door. I tried to open it, but I just floated through it. There he was, leaning over a small planter in front of the window, looking for the source of the noise. I walked over behind him and gave him a shove as hard as I could. Okay, maybe you saw this coming, but I was an emotional newly reformed non-corporeal being. Having been solid all my life, I expected to connect or at least feel the impact. Instead, I just spun around in a bit of an ethereal whirlwind. Hell, I couldn't have kicked him anyway. I have no feet. Tom was laughing in the doorway, and Jim just stood up and shivered as if a cold chill ran up his spine. It was probably the breeze coming off me as I rotated rapidly for what seemed like 20 seconds. He then shrugged and walked straight through me as if I wasn't there. Well, I suppose I wasn't there to him. I followed him back to my old bedroom, but Tom stopped me. Hold on there. We still have some talking to do before you do anything. The first thing you have to remember is that you've been dead for quite a while, and Becky never has been one to be alone for very long. That's part of why she fell into the arms of Jim in the first place. You used to spend a lot of time at work, earning that big paycheck and setting yourself up for the next promotion. She got into some church work to fill her time, and Jim saw his chance. If you hadn't guessed it, he's done this sort of thing before, and that's why you're here. What's why I'm here? I mean, why am I here? You're here to stop Jim from taking advantage of Becky. I'd say it's a bit too late for that, I replied sarcastically. Not like that, doofus. He's only sticking around now for the insurance check and the settlement from the drunk that hit you. As soon as he can get his hands on that cash, which should be well over $500,000 after the lawyer's cut, he's going to leave her high and dry. I thought you didn't know the future. I don't know the future because it can change, and in this case, you can change it. I'd say that she deserves what she gets, don't you? The betrayer becomes the betrayed, sort of karmic payback. It's not my call, Ken. Either way, you have to hang around here for a while before the call to judgment. Do what you think is right. This is going to suck. I get to hang around here and helplessly watch my wife and her lover live in my house and live what should have been my life. He's probably in there right now, in my bed. How long must I endure this pain on top of all the other stuff I've been through? Like I said, I'm not sure of the future, but I believe the insurance payout will come in about 30 days. Great, just great. No wonder ghosts moan in pain and try to scare the living. It's the only thing they can do because they're hurt and pissed. Now, Ken, there are a few other things you should know. First, Becky still loves you very much. I know it looks like she picked a poor way to show it, but it was their first time. If she said it, you wouldn't believe it, but I'm telling you this as the simple fact that it is. Jim is a skilled predator and Becky put him through the ringer before, and in a moment of weakness, she finally gave in. He's a con man, pure and simple. He has aspirations of moving up to a higher level of targets, using your settlement money as seed money to make himself look rich. Becky was feeling so guilty about your death that she wanted to end things between them, but he manipulated her into keeping it going while cooling it for a while. He just moved in a week ago, and they had sex for only the second time that night. Life is not all roses and wine for either one of them. Tom spent the next few hours explaining the do's and don'ts of being dead. Then he wrapped it up. Well, I've got to be going. I'll check in on you from time to time. If you need me, just call for me, yell my name as loud and as long as you can. I have other spirits to guide, so I might not be able to come right away, but I'll get to you as soon as I can. Any questions? How can I make this suck less? It seems like someone is trying to rub salt in my wounds. Don't you think I've suffered enough? It doesn't matter what you think. This whole situation is what you make it. Only you can make it suck less. You've got some thinking to do. Oh, and there may be a surprise left for you, but I won't let the cat out of the bag. You can figure this one out on your own later, Ken. With a smile and a wave, Tom faded out. I couldn't bring myself to even look at Becky, but I followed Jim around like a hawk when she wasn't around. If he farted, I could tell you how bad it stunk. If he was going to be around Becky, I left them alone, he'd be okay around her. If they started getting intimate, I knew I'd lose it. Tom had given me some exercises to learn how to use and channel my emotions to get a message across to the living. I began to use my ghostly moans to send messages. It took a lot out of me to get that emotional, so I couldn't send another message for a few hours. I was getting better at it. One day, I was in the family room while Jim watched baseball on my big screen. Wouldn't you know it, he was a Cubs fan. I was sending him a message that I considered him a jerk. He didn't seem to get the message when I wildly waved my arms as I let my ghostly moan fly. I brushed against the lampshade and made it shake, startling myself more than Jim. If I focused more on my hurt, maybe I could affect the physical world a little here and there. Tom had told me that a few of his spirits had developed that ability over time, usually a lot of time. A few days later, Becky was at work and Jim was lounging about the house because he'd lost his job to a layoff. He spoke to someone on the phone, and it was obvious it was a woman. "Hey, babes, it's good to hear your voice again. Are you out?" "Yeah, I guess that was a dumb question. At least you only got 90 days. Listen, I've got a mark and should have this wrapped up in a few weeks. Are you good where you're at? You should have some cash left in the bank from the last job we did together. I can't really send you any more right now. I have to keep up appearances. She thinks I'm an investment banker. I know it's not much, but can you make it last? The payoff on this one is going to be our biggest score yet, and if you show up, we might blow it." After a longer pause, he added, "Because if I know you're close to me, I'll have to come to you for some affection. Trust me on this one, the person I'm with right now can't hold a candle to you. She's just not that passionate and lacks imagination. The old man just caught us, and then he got into an accident and is now waiting for the insurance settlement and his life insurance policy, which will be enough to set us up real good. If you have enough to stay put, please do so. We can call most every day while she's at work. I don't want to take a chance on blowing this one, there's too much at stake." He continued with a conversation that quickly degraded into intimate talk. I didn't stick around for that, but I did notice the large object he pulled out as I left the room. I think I found one reason why Becky was drawn to him. As a member of the not quite dead but not quite alive, I didn't sleep as the living know it. When I got tired, usually during the day, I would fade out, only to fade in again some hours later. This left me many hours at night where I was bored and lonely, with no one to talk to and unable to watch TV. I saw Becky as just a covered lump on the bed in a darkened room. I still couldn't stand to see her after what she'd done. I was left alone with my thoughts, pondering how to ensure Jim wouldn't benefit from the money meant for her, given that she did nothing to earn it but betray me. I had plenty of time to consider these questions. 2 weeks into my torment, I began to hatch a plan using bits of information I gathered from watching Jim. He was planning to transfer the money from my death benefits to a bank in the Cayman Islands within hours of the insurance check clearing. Once it was confirmed in his account, he was going to leave in the middle of the night, meeting with his accomplice Jane on their way to a vacation in the Bahamas. If I timed it right, he'd transfer the cash, and I could somehow deliver the evidence of his crimes to the right people. Hopefully, they could pick him up before he boarded his plane. I was working out the details of how to get the goods on Jim and let people know when I got the surprise that Tom had mentioned. Jim and Jane spoke at least once a day while Becky was at work, and as an interested party, I always listened in. Jane had been expressing concerns about Jim's interactions with Becky. Jim, on the other hand, let something slip that left me stunned. Babes, I'm not having much physical contact with her, very little, at most once a week. Yeah, being pregnant lowers her drive, he said. I was shocked. 1,000 questions ran through my mind. Jim laughed. No, it's not mine. I got a vasectomy years ago. Remember, she was almost a month along when I finally got involved with her, and even she didn't know. She freaked out when she missed her period. Feeling guilty after our first time, then being pregnant and not even knowing who the father was, just added to it. He laughed again. She called me as soon as she got back from the doctor. I'd been trying to comfort her from a distance because she pushed me away after the accident. She calmed down some after I told her I'd been fixed due to a genetic issue. A few days later, she told me she was considering an abortion because she couldn't deal with the constant reminder of her betrayal. Her family talked her out of it, saying a piece of you would live on. Of course, they didn't know we had been together in the church kitchen. My anger soared as Jim gloated about Becky's pain. She was my wife. I loved her. Get out! I screamed at him, my voice filled with rage. He sat up in the chair, looking around in panic. I think he heard me this time. My anger was relentless. I went about the room, trying to knock things over or break anything I could touch. I managed to knock over a plastic flower arrangement and a picture frame from our wedding. Jim was seriously spooked, holding the phone away from his ear as Jane loudly asked what was happening. I directed my attention to him and charged at him, well, through him. This time, he felt it. What the hell is going on here? Jim yelled. Who's here? Come out right now, and I won't kick your butt. I went from angry to confused as I realized he could see and feel what I was doing. I laughed harder than I ever had, partly from the fear on his face and mostly from the relief of releasing all the pent-up emotions. Who's laughing? I can hear you laughing. Show yourself right now, and I won't have you arrested, he demanded. I hadn't considered he could hear my laughter. Was it the pent-up emotions or was he just unusually receptive because of my actions? I wasn't sure, but I decided to try something. I got in his ear and yelled, I'm Ken Goodman, and I'm back. No, it can't be you. You're dead. What's going on? You can't scam me. How are you doing this? I'm a ghost, you fool. I yelled again. I must have lost my emotional edge because he didn't react. I was getting tired anyway, having been filled with confusing emotions and having laughed harder than I had in ages. Several hours later, when I faded in again, it was almost time for Becky to come home. After my proclamations, I realized I still loved her, but I was furious about what she'd done to me. However, if she was pregnant with my baby, I needed to see her. I wanted to touch or at least try to touch her belly to confirm she had my baby inside her. When she came through the door, I was waiting for her in the kitchen. She looked like she had lost weight overall, but there was definitely a baby bump, made more noticeable by her thinness. She walked into the family room where Jim was watching a Cubs game on my big screen. He gave her a brief kiss on the cheek before she sat down on the nearby couch. What a day, she said. Any luck in the job search? Jim replied, I have one new lead, and I haven't heard back from the interview on Monday yet. He hadn't looked for anything or gone to any interview. That's good. Just don't give up. I know it's hard out there in this economy, but you'll get something soon. Oh, I haven't given up. I'm not even close, he said, turning his attention back to the game. Run like you stole something, you're going to get tagged. Damn, they got him. An errant thought occurred to me. If I could somehow influence the game to make the Cubs lose more often, it might ruin his day. But I didn't want to affect all the innocent Cubs fans out there. Still, Wrigley was a couple 100 miles away, and I didn't want to be away from Jim long enough to let him make plans I didn't know about. Becky rolled her eyes at Jim's distraction with the game as she settled in. I went to her and looked at the life growing inside her. I slowly reached down to caress her belly, and my heart melted when I touched her. She got a peaceful smile on her face as I rubbed both hands around her baby bump. I could almost feel the warmth from both of them and the love she had developed for the baby. How could I know it was a boy? I just felt a strong sense that I was going to have a son, and in that moment, it all became real to me. Becky closed her eyes and relaxed, basking in the emotional connection we three now shared. With my right hand, I reached out and gently touched her belly, trying to convey my love to the baby. I moved my other hand to Becky's cheek, and her head tilted to the side, just as it used to when I touched her face. We were in a moment of bliss until Jim's voice broke through. "Get your wings, you damn ball," he yelled, as the announcer said, "It's going." The potential home run ball approached the outfield fence and dropped just inside, scoring only one run for the Cubs. I was frustrated that he had ruined our moment, so I got up and tried to smack him on the head. I didn't connect, but it made me feel a bit better. I focused my anger and aimed my finger at the power button on the remote, successfully shutting off the TV. Jim was about to accuse Becky of turning it off when he realized the remote was on the arm of his recliner, too far for her to reach. He muttered to himself, "I must have bumped the button," trying to reassure himself after the events of earlier. He then noticed Becky looking very confused. "Are you okay, hun?" she asked. "Yeah, I must have dozed off for a moment," she replied, reorienting herself. "It's the craziest thing, but I dreamt that Ken was here. He was holding me and the baby. It felt so wonderful that I didn't want to wake up." She sighed, her face falling sad again as she missed me. Jim felt a cold shiver run down his spine and got a bit nervous at the mention of my name. It was unusual for him, but not out of character given his earlier experiences. "Well, he's not here. I am. I'll stay with you through all of this. I'll even raise the child as if it were my own. I promise you this," Jim said, trying to comfort Becky. She was convinced by his words, though he was a professional con man. I followed her into the kitchen. When she reached for something from a high shelf, I wrapped my arms around her waist, as I had done so many times before. I just held her, and she seemed to sense me, or perhaps my love. It wasn't as intense this time, but it was still pleasant and warm. In a moment, she shook me off as if I were a remnant of a good dream that interrupted her task. I guess that's what I was now. When I was alive, I wasn't into cuddling much. I'd get too hot and sweaty. Occasionally, during cold Illinois winters, I'd enjoy a short cuddle while watching a movie with Becky under an afghan her grandma had crocheted. But since my untimely death, that hug was the best feeling I'd had. I felt warm inside and almost alive again. I began visiting Becky in her dreams, caressing her head while she slept. We had brief conversations. It's hard to communicate with the living, and my abilities weren't strong enough to keep the connection open for long. My messages to her were meant to protect and look after the best interests of our unborn son. If he was to grow up emotionally well-adjusted, he couldn't have a mother burdened with guilt over every reminder of me. My feelings of betrayal turned into anger directed at myself for neglecting her and at Jim for seducing her. I began to forgive her for our son's sake and for the happy times we had shared. My first message to her was that I was very happy to be having a son. She wanted to know how I knew. I told her I was watching over her and the baby, and I would do all I could to ensure she was happy and that he would grow up to be a good man. The next night, I told her she should no longer cry for me. She needed to find a good man to help raise our son. He would need a strong father figure in his life, and she would need to move on. She resisted this notion, though we both knew Jim was sleeping only inches away. She thought that if I visited her like this, she could find the strength to raise him alone. She was sad when I told her my time was limited and that her plan was not an option. She felt that being with another man would be another betrayal, though I offered no other details before fading out of her dream. Their relationship began to cool after that. Despite his best efforts, Jim couldn't seem to get it back on track. He told himself that he only had to make it last for 2 more weeks until he could get his hands on the money. He'd make every effort but wouldn't push too hard, so it wouldn't come to a head or, at the very least, she'd feel very guilty for throwing an unemployed nice guy out of her house. Several nights later, I told Becky to buy a voice-activated recording device and plant it in the family room where he usually took his calls from Jane. She questioned me as to why she needed to do this, and I told her it would become apparent when she did. It took 3 nights of dreams to get her to do this, and she finally caved in. The night after she set it up, I told her to prepare herself for a brutal truth to be revealed when she listened to the recording the next day, as I'd heard him incriminate himself rather well. I advised her to be calm and have a close friend with her when she listened to it, but not to listen to it at home. She grabbed the recorder from under the end table on her way out the door to work the next morning and had Jenny, her best friend from work, come into her office for a closed-door meeting. She explained that her trust in Jim was faltering, so she planted this device and wanted someone with her when she heard it. They listened to Jim talk on his cell to Jane and were both in shock and tears. In a short time, he belittled Becky in every way he could think of, expressed his anticipation for running away with Jane, and discussed the details of their plan, including the Cayman account and the deposit date. He even mentioned buying airline tickets. Jenny comforted her and, once they had calmed down, said, "Becky, you have to call the cops. You don't know what he might do if he finds out you know. You can't go back there without some sort of protection or plan, especially with the baby to think about." After some prodding, Becky took the afternoon off and spent it with the Bunko department and the district attorney, telling them her story and presenting her evidence. That night, Becky had a lot of trouble falling asleep next to Jim, but when she finally did, I was there. She wanted to know how I knew, and I just told her there were few secrets on this side. She asked why I hadn't just told her what Jim was doing, and I replied that she probably wouldn't have believed me. Con men like him were quite good at making people believe what they wanted. She was concerned for the baby's safety, and I told her that he hadn't seriously hurt anyone yet and was likely to just run away if he thought he was found out. She mentioned that the cops were setting up a sting and needed a few days to get it done, and they needed her to act as if nothing was wrong. I assured her that I'd help where I could but wouldn't let him harm her or the baby. She sat straight up in bed, startled me, and I fell silently to the floor. Jim, somewhat groggy, asked if I was okay. Becky replied, "Oh yeah, I'm fine. I just had a dream about what I should name the baby. I'm naming him Kenneth Ryan Goodman Jr." When Jim questioned if it might be a girl, she insisted that it was definitely a boy and he would bear his father's name. Jim relaxed a little more after that. The cops didn't want to accelerate the timetable to avoid tipping him off. They bugged the house and gave Becky a bracelet with a panic button, so she could call for help day or night if needed. I watched Jim and reported to Becky that he had no clue we were onto him and his plan. One night, Becky asked why I was doing my best to help her after she had betrayed our love. I told her that I had forgiven her, even though I was partially to blame for neglecting her. Jim was the one who deserved my wrath. He had taken full advantage of the situation, and Becky had been manipulated by a professional. I explained that he initially wanted some sex while locating his next mark, but with the insurance money coming in, she became the target. Becky had some responsibility in this, but since I didn't have to worry about her cheating on me again, it was easy for me to put my son's best interest ahead of everything else. I also told her that I still loved her despite her mistakes. She professed her undying love for me as well, and I suggested she leave room in her heart for another person to help raise my son and possibly his children. I would do my best to guide her to a good man. She didn't want to think about that after all that had happened, but I asked her how she would feel if it were her who had passed on. Would she want me to find someone to help raise our child in the best way possible? Reluctantly, she understood. I reminded her that she had a big heart with lots of love and would have the happiest life possible if she could remember that. It was time for me to fade out, and for both of us to get some rest. It was the day before the money transfer when we learned that Jane had come to town and was staying at a hotel by the airport. Jim had been taking a few things to her that he wanted to take with him, like Becky's jewelry. He knew he'd have to leave most of his clothes behind so as not to alert anyone, which didn't trouble him too much because he'd be buying more and better clothes to suit his new image. He had also spent part of the morning and early afternoon there, enjoying her company. When the time came, Jim got up from bed at 1 o'clock in the morning, went to his laptop, and set up the transfer. When he received the transfer confirmation from the cops, not the bank as he had expected, he sent a text to Jane to come pick him up. He got dressed and took a few items from the house that he had become attached to during his stay. Becky pretended to be asleep but got up when she heard the front door close. She watched him put a small bag in the trunk, give a lingering kiss to an attractive woman she had never seen before, and get into the car. She breathed a sigh of relief. They reached the airport by 2 for their 4 o'clock flight to Atlanta, where they would switch identities and fly to Miami, switch identities again, and then take a cruise to the Bahamas. Airport security stopped them as they went individually through the baggage screener. When they were both securely in the detention area, they were arrested and taken to the police station, where they were formally charged with a long list of crimes. They were going away for a long time. Later, Becky had to go to the police station to identify the stolen items. When she met a new man from the DA's office, who had recently graduated from law school and was a widower with a 2-year-old daughter, they seemed to hit it off. Every time they got near each other, one of them would drop something or bump into the other. Eventually, he took the hint and asked her out to dinner. It was a good thing he did, as I had maybe 1 or 2 more moments left to share with her. That night, I told Becky that Joe, the man she had met, was indeed a good person who would make a good husband and father. If there was any chemistry between them, she shouldn't let him get away. I already knew there would be chemistry, but I didn't want to spoil anything for them. With tears in my eyes, I told her that my time was now up, or would be very soon. We didn't have a chance to say goodbye last time, and since I wasn't entirely sure when I'd be leaving, we should say it now. She didn't want me to go, and I told her I didn't want to leave either, but I would do what I could to watch over her in Little Kentucky. We hugged and held each other tightly in bed. I moved my hand to her belly and touched where my son was growing, as I had done a couple of weeks ago in a dream. In the dream, Becky and I stood with our arms around each other, little Ken between us. We kissed, and I felt myself fading away. Goodbye, my love. Live a good life, and we will meet again. I love you, I said. She replied that she'd love me until the end of time. As I faded out of her sight, Becky cried until she woke up. She realized that even though she was really alone now, I would be there in ways she couldn't understand. I was watching her, and my heart was breaking. Tom's arm rested on my shoulder. It's time to go, he said. I don't want to go. I need to stay here and take care of my son, I protested. Shut up, doofus, he replied, starting to float away from the house, away from the ground and the earth. Haven't you ever heard of guardian angels? Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.